Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, Vince joins me to discuss an article by Jon Marcus of the Hechinger Report entitled, "To Help New Students Adapt, Some Colleges Are Eliminating Grades." Alex sends in a question, and she wants to know, how important is it for a student to take advanced math if math is not her jam? And she wants to go to a selective college. We continue with part 3 of Akil Bello's interview on tough questions about test scores, and our college spotlight is another one of those hidden gems that flies under the radar, as Lisa lets us know about East Carolina, which she recently visited in June. Vince, what's new, my friend?
Well, just getting ready for a big trip. So when the listeners hear this, I'll be traveling the world. I'm really excited about a trip. It's a trip that we planned before the pandemic. So we had to do it, or
Sure.
we were going to lose it. So I'm getting ready for that, but so excited to be in cool weather for nearly 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about your trip. As you go outside the country, you're almost the exact same time when I'm going to be on the road as well. So when this actually goes live, you'll be overseas, and I'll be in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, for a 6-day family reunion, and then I'm staying 7 more days, so 13 days in total in Pagosa Springs, Colorado for me. So it sounds good, but we got a lot to talk about today, but I want you to start us off with our tip.
Sure. So this tip comes because the College Board is offering a new AP next year, AP pre-calculus, and I just found it fascinating. You know, I had a parent ask me about it, and I was like, AP pre-calculus, really? So I did a little bit of reading about that. It's most, the College Board is recommending that high schools don't have sort of tiered levels. So hopefully there'll be pre-calculus and AP pre-calculus instead of like maybe pre-calculus, honors pre-calculus, and AP pre-calculus. And part of it was their rationale was they wanted to give students a bridge to calculus and to increase, equity in APs. When you look at the numbers of students, underrepresented students who take STEM-related math and science courses, it's only 4%. So they felt that this might increase access for those students, and if they're successful, the students might be more likely to take AP Bio or AP Physics or other APs that are offered.
Yeah, now I'm feeling a little guilty over here because so I went to a College Board conference in Orlando this last year. In fact, Vince and I were actually talking about it before we came on air at the end of September. And, one of the things I do like about that conference is they always roll out new things. So this is where they announced like that African American history class. This is when they announced the AP pre-calc. And I had always planned on coming back here and doing a deeper dive on it because I had like 20 minutes of recordings on that thing. And then, next thing you know, here it is. I haven't even done it yet. So I might have known a little more if I would have done a deep dive on it like I was supposed to do. But no, I was surprised to learn that less than 50% of Black kids attend a school that offers calculus.
Yeah.
Not offered.
Wow.
So
wow.
This is all part of that conversation we've been having on here for a while, how slowly but surely calculus is losing a little bit of its luster as you need to see calc on the transcript for highly competitive school. Like, this is all part of people looking back and saying, why has that always been the case when oftentimes statistics correlates a lot better?
Right.
Look at the access issues that it opens up and who doesn't have it. Now, our listeners are going to get a good dose of this. I've completed an interview with Akil Bello. And, he doesn't pull punches. He knows how to break glass. So he does not spare his thoughts on how the College Board always does things with a financial motive, but likes to present themselves as being educationally service oriented. But every time you look behind the corner, it's Ching Ching always there, dressed up as educational service. So I'm sure that motive isn't lost on them, that it's potentially a moneymaker, just to present the other side of the equation there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, with the rollout of new APs and new content, one of those APs, in African American history, received a lot of press because of content issues, but literally, like, not a peep on AP pre-calculus. Nobody holding up signs, and saying, what's in that curriculum? But I do hope if, students here hear this and they get a chance to look at the courses when they come to them in August and they find out that it's offered, maybe some students who were trying to find that bridge between calculus and stats, this is a great way to go. And I hope that more students will take the opportunity if they feel like they're qualified.
Yeah, because we know this. There's a lot of schools that don't need calc. They'd be really happy with pre-calc. And if it's AP, they'd be even happier for substantiating rigor and showing good foundational math skills. So, I do think that this course has some good potential. But we'll follow it and track it and come back and see how it lands.
Yes.
Julia likes to say. I borrowed that from Julia. That landed well. That didn't land well. I've kind of incorporated that into my lexicon. I like when she says that.
Now, was Julia a former gymnast? Is that why she likes the lands, or the
I don't know.
Ice skater, maybe?
No, just college admissions. It's all
Love
good. So let's transition and let's talk about our admissions vernacular. It's actually a term that's going to come up in the article that Vince and I are discussing today. And the term is ungrading. Ungrading, and it refers to colleges increasingly offering courses without grades. And I'll leave it at that because you're going to hear an earful of that in the news. But ungrading is the word of the day. I had not heard that term used before this article, Vince.
Yeah, I think it's a great term to dive into, because coming out of COVID, I think there's some good things to think about in terms of helping students transition to full-time learning, because a lot of the students who are coming out of high school experienced a year or more of classroom online, and there needs to be some adjustment.
No doubt. Now, my big number is another one I got to give Vince credit for. So Vince been on fire, by the way. You've actually surpassed Dave at sending me the most great articles. So all of our co-hosts, we all circulate articles amongst each other. Lisa's also up there knocking on the door for that award, surfacing great articles into our message groups. And Vince's was on fire for a while. He sent me like 5 or 6 great ones in a row. One we're going to talk about today, another we're going to use for our August article, and then for our big number. So the big number is 90, and it has to do, it's 90%. And a lot of times we've had a lot of discussion on the podcast about how students are questioning the value of college and all these polls coming out. Is college worth it? And college being under attack. But this is a Harris poll that was done with the graduating class of 2023, National Harris poll, looking at the spring graduates. So it did target graduates. That's a little, didn't necessarily target people who started but didn't finish. But the 90% said that they are glad they went to college. 90%. The same supermajority also agreed that a degree is the best way for someone to secure their future. So nice to have a little good news because college has been under assault. We've had a lot of negative numbers when it's come to the trend line for is college worth it. But nice to have a positive one. 90% saying it's worth it. And there's a pretty large sample size in the survey too. So good stuff there.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right, we're going to transition to our article for the day, which we've already slightly teased out, but I thought listeners might be interested a little bit in how our articles selected. Well, sometimes I select them, and it depends a little bit on the co-host. Like, Dave and Julia, they're like, you select the articles, that's one less thing for me to do. And then Vincent and Susan, sometimes they have me selected. Sometimes they shoot me articles that they like, and I'm good either way. So this is one that Vince found and sent to me, and I love it. It's our friend Jon Marcus from the Hechinger Report, and it went live in March 23 of this year, but it also got picked up by a lot of different news outlets. And so the name of the article is to help new students adapt. Some colleges are eliminating grades, and it focuses on a few different students. A couple at UCSC, that's University of California, Santa Cruz. So it starts out with a story of Joy Malek, and she was like, I'm floundering in my first year of college. I mean, here I am. I'm trying to balance my finances. I'm trying to learn how to balance work and school and a relationship I'm in. And that's the hardest part about being a new student. It isn't the coursework. It's learning how to be an adult. And she talks about how she's also got this double major of neuroscience and literature. And here's a quote from her. It took me a while to detangle my sense of self-worth from the grades I was getting. It made me consider switching out of my major a handful of times. So goes on to say, experiences like this are among the many reasons behind a growing movement to stop assigning conventional A through F letter grades to first-year college students and sometimes even to upperclassmen. And here's the term. They're calling it ungrading. We've already explained that. It says, advocates say the most important reason to adopt ungrading is that students have become so preoccupied with grades that they aren't actually learning. Here's a quote from Jody Green. She's a special advisor to the provost of educational equity and academic success at Santa Cruz. And she says, grades are not a representation of student learning, as hard as it is for us to break the mindset that if a student got an A, it means that they learned. It goes on to talk about there's a lot of momentum behind ungrading, and a lot of the momentum actually has to do with the growing concerns around student mental health. It talks about how the number of college students with one or more mental health problems has doubled since 2013. And that was a study that was done by Boston University and some other researchers. And teenagers say the pressure to get good grades is their biggest cause of stress. And that was a 2019 Pew Research Center study. I'm going to keep going, and there's a lot more to say here. But you know what, Vince? I would agree with that. Don't you see incredible pressure that kids feel to get good grades? And that rings true with me that would be the number one cause of stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I was, just talking with a student recently, and at his school, even though the grading scale seems to go from A+, where very few students get that particular grade, to B, there's a lot of pressure on this student, and the way he described his grades to me, it sounded to me, who's, in the past, I would have friends who got a D or an F or didn't pass a class. The way he described it, it sounded like he had a D or an F, but in fact, he'd only received one B+, and the rest of the grades were A's. And the way he talked about it, I just thought, wow.
I know. I hear you, my friend.
We've lost some perspective, and I felt badly because he really felt like some of his college options had disappeared.
Sad.
Yeah. So that pressure is absolutely there. And it's interesting. I think at the University of California, Santa Cruz, one of the things that we saw when we talked about the UCs in the fall in terms of who they admitted, that nearly 50% of the students were coming from, or maybe it was over 40%, had incomes where they were below the poverty line. So when you talk about sort of ungrading and preparing the landscape, I remember when I went to college, I was first generation. My parents did not go to college. Both my parents finished high school. My father finished college much later in life. But that first, oh my gosh, that first
Mhm.
quarter in college was so challenging because in high school I had only written one paper of 3 pages
Wow.
long.
Wow.
And then I was in
And
3,
you went to Oxy.
yes.
I know you're writing some papers at Oxy, man.
Oh, I was every
That's
week.
short for Occidental listeners. We just call it Oxy. Yeah.
There was one class, my freshman writing seminar, we wrote a 3-page paper every week.
Had to
So,
up your game, man.
oh, wow. And when I got those grades,
Hmm.
it was a challenge. But,
You could have used some ungrading, it sounds like, back then.
that semester I needed some ungrading, let's just say. But I think when you're trying to level the playing field, you're giving
Hmm.
opportunities to students that, especially in a system that is really built to nurture those overcoming obstacles. So the UC, the CSU system in particular, even the community college system, there maybe should be a little bit of ungrading there as well. I think it gives students an opportunity. We'll talk about some of the schools that think maybe it's not as successful, but in those settings where you're at large public universities or you're serving a very diverse first generation population, it makes total sense to me.
I hear you. So here's a quote from Serena Ramirez. She says, "A lot of the time I'm just so stressed in the class that I can barely focus." The article goes on to talk about the pandemics. Why skill disruption has made it a really good time to consider changing long-held educational policies. And that's according to Robert Talbert, who's a math professor at Grand Valley State in Michigan. And he's actually co-written a book about new ways of assessing students and says he's tried some of them in his own classes. He says, everything's on the table right now. Why not throw the grading system in while we're at it? The article goes on to say that not everybody is on board with this. Critics liken replacing traditional A to F grades with new forms of assessment to college-level version of participation trophies. We always joke about everybody gets a trophy nowadays in youth sports because we can't let little Johnny, get a self-esteem hit by not winning something. So the critics liken it to that. And they say taking away grades is coddling students and treating them like snowflakes. Here's a quote. "To tell me that these students are too fragile at age 18 or 19 for their educators to actually give them feedback on what they've learned or what they've mastered strikes me as missing a pretty significant element of the purpose of higher ed," said Robert Hess, Director of Educational Policy Studies at the conservative American Enterprise Institute. "Instead of not grading them," Hess says, "faculty should work harder to help less well-prepared students to succeed." So things like grades and clear assessments can be enormously useful handrails to help you make your way, he said. Now, in addition to the efforts going on at Santa Cruz, there are a growing number of faculty and some academic departments at other universities nationwide that are experimenting with alternative kinds of assessment. And many of these started in the pandemic. So, for example, there's instructors doing some really creative things at UC Davis when it comes to letting students decide between taking a verbal versus a written exam. I know some of that's also going on at UCSD as well in San Diego, giving them choice of how those exams and homework count. And that's according to Tim Lewis, the UC Davis Department Vice Chair for Undergraduate Matters. Lewis says these efforts are meant to improve learning outcomes as well as to be fair and to advance equity. And then there was a big report that came out from the University of California Board of Regents of Academic and Student Affairs Committee that said that traditional grading methods could be perpetuating a bias. And then the article talks about all the different online discussion groups that are going on at colleges all across the country right now when it comes to ungrading. And so it says right now there's major forums and discussions going on at TCU in Fort Worth, Roger Williams University in Rhode Island, Florida Gulf Coast, Grand Valley State, University of New Hampshire, South Alabama, Knox College in Illinois, Colorado College in Colorado Springs, Prince George's Community College, and Howard Community College in Maryland, as well as Harrisonburg area Community College in Pennsylvania. All of these have like these discussion groups going on right now related to ungrading. Here's a quote. I get emails just about weekly from people who are implementing ungrading. Today, I had 3 emails about it alone, and that's according to Susan Blum, professor of anthropology at University of Notre Dame. And Susan Blum also is the author. She's the main editor of a book called Ungrading, and the subtitle of that book is Why Rating Students Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead. And then there's other faculty at places like University of Pittsburgh, Missouri State, University of Texas Austin, Ball State, Barnard, Emory in Atlanta, and Baylor that are all making information about ungrading available for faculty. So these schools, these colleges and universities are practicing unconventional forms of, I'll restate this. And then there's several other colleges that are practicing unconventional forms of grading. Of course, we know Reed. We've talked about that before in Oregon, and we've had Miljan Chulov on the podcast, where students aren't shown their grades, so they can focus on learning, not grades, the college says. The New College of Florida completes contracts establishing goals and then gets written evaluations. And then, of course, at Brown University in Rhode Island, you have a choice among written evaluations where you only see results of satisfactory or no credit, or letter grades of A, B, C, D, or F. And then we had MIT on the podcast before, and they've talked about what they've done for first-year students to reduce stress in the first semesters, where they only get a pass without a letter grade. If they don't pass, there's no letter grade recorded at all. That's first semester. And then in the second semester, they get letter grades, but grades of D and F are not recorded on their transcript. So that's something MIT's done to ease the transition into first year. And article goes on to say, starting any university is challenging to get acclimated to a new environment, and it's a big change for most students. For many of them, it's the first time they've been away from home or at a new school. That's according to MIT's Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate and Graduate Education. There's a desire to have that acclimation to the entire environment happen in a less abrupt way, where students have an opportunity to get calibrated. That's kind of a good way of putting it. Give students an opportunity to get calibrated. The article goes on to say many proponents of ungrading say that it addresses the unfairness in the system, and it helps students to be ready to have balance, and it's especially helpful for first-generation students that feel extra stressed to perform well. The article goes on to say that some drop out altogether. One of the things they say again and again is it's heartbreaking. I wasn't satisfied with my academic performance, so why not just drop out? So they talk about how this ungrading can help retention. The article quotes Talbert, an educational expert at Grand Valley State. He said he likes the idea of ungrading, but his own experience has made him question if it's necessarily a solution to equity. He feels like basically a lot of students are just not performing as well as they used to. Those from privileged backgrounds feel more competent to be more reflective, and those from less privileged backgrounds don't feel that comfortable to be reflective. He thinks rather than have a focus on ungrading, we should focus on teaching kids to have reflective skills on how they've done in schools. Other realities also make it really hard to change letter grades. One of them is this is how faculty had been judged their whole life, so they're in a grading mode. Parents are used to it. High schools are used to it. University officials are used to it. It goes on to say even car insurance companies give grades on discounts for a good student-age driver. You get a discount for a good student-age driver. So our whole system has just been built on this grading system. There's a quote from Michael Poliakoff. He's the president of American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and he's not a fan of ungrading. He says, I really fear that we're shooting the messenger because we don't like what we're hearing. It's just setting up students to slam into the wall ultimately and to end up with a ticket to nowhere diploma that doesn't represent the mastery of the skills. So you really see the debate from those who are proponents of it, those who are not proponents of it. You've really got people on both sides. It talks about Wellesley College, where students get a pass or fail grades only in their first semester, and they aren't assigned letter grade. And they're also assigned letter grades that only they can see. Found that this encouraged more students to take tougher classes. It freed them from worrying about their grade point average. And then it talks about another school, Johns Hopkins, and how they have reversed the policy of giving satisfactory or unsatisfactory grades to first-year freshmen. They also got so-called cover letter grades so they could see, but it didn't go on their transcripts. It decided that covered grades merely delayed the development of study skills and the adaptation to college-level work. And that's according to 2 university deans that wrote an email about why they ended the practice. So it's, you really see both the detractors and the proponents on both sides of the article. So Vince, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, I really enjoyed reading the article because they tried to present a balanced perspective and give multiple settings. And it was interesting within a selective college setting, whether it was Wellesley or Johns Hopkins or Reed or MIT, there was clearly a difference of opinion. Johns Hopkins did away with the practice and felt that it encouraged students to not be as prepared as they needed to be and not make that transition. I will say, going back to my Oxy experience, I didn't know how to write when I went to college, but by the end of my freshman year, I sure knew how to write much better. So the ramp up, because I, was motivated, I went in and got support. Oxy was very good about providing writing support. I was not someone who was afraid to ask for support. By the end of the year, those 2 C's that I got, I never got C's again. And
there you go.
I adapted, but it was interesting. It was through through wanting to be successful and understanding that with the right tools and the right support, I could find the message. So I think this article, it's important conversation for colleges to have. I believe they need to look at their population and do what works best. And I could see, policies of ungrading and grading within departments, because I do think that students at MIT, there needs to be some ramp up because almost everybody that they're around are in the top 2 to 3%. And if all they're focused on is the end result in that first semester, I feel like they may not develop the right skills. But in other situations, because most of the students are coming in well prepared to sort of mask their grades and not help them adapt more quickly, that might be the wrong thing. So I could see this, this policy working at some universities and not being implemented at others, and maybe even department by department.
You have a real nuanced view to it, and I respect that. I always respect nuance. I will say this in general, I'm a really big proponent of this, especially for the first semester.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just because of what the quotes that were at the start of the article. There's so many adjustments going on. For many times, this is the first time people have lived away from home.
Yep.
We've talked about this before, but when you go from high school to college, you're really going from a structured environment to a very unstructured environment. I mean, when you're in college, it's not uncommon at all for you to have no classes an entire day. You might have classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and maybe a 10 a.m. class one day. So you have that entire day. So that you're adjusting to time management. You may be adjusting to homesickness. You're adjusting to living with a new roommate who may be completely different from you. In general, you've lost your whole social system as far as friends, and you're building a brand new friendship structure. Who knows what other problems you may be encountering? You might have financial problems. You might have health problems. You might have family problems. You might have relationship problems. Now you're getting used to a whole new grading system. Maybe like Vince, you're experiencing higher degrees of rigor or more writing requirements than you used to, you might, another thing that a lot of students struggle with is they've always been toward the top of their class, and now they're not. And their whole psychology is, I'm a straight A kid.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're getting those C's, or even B's for some people can send them, into panic attacks. So to me, there's just so many life adjustments that are going on. Why not take one semester? I don't see how one semester erodes all the benefits of higher ed. I just don't. And another thing that I really like about the system is the ability to teach, to emphasize learning for the sake of learning.
Yes.
Let's face it, people have been conditioned to the goal's the A. And that does take away learning for the sake of learning. That's why you see the mastery transcript concept. That's why Reed does what they do and believe in it so strongly. And, I realize that Reed is not everybody's cup of tea, but you have to give them credit for their emphasis on learning for the sake of learning and not learning to get a grade.
Yeah.
And that's why they've stuck with their approach year after year, because they say it really transforms people's thinking. And that's definitely an environment where people have an incredible thirst to learn. And so to me, I'm a real advocate. I'm a proponent of it. But I'm also a proponent of your thinking, which is what works for one place may not always work for another place. And I do believe in allowing educational experimentation to occur. But in general, if you ask me how I feel about this, if I have a chance to vote, my hands up so fast it's not even funny before you can blink. At least for one semester, at least, because I think that's so many adjustments that first 3 to 4 months. And I think that's for sure. That's what I'm an advocate of. I think after that, it may depend on a lot of different factors. And we never even mentioned when I went over the list of all the adjustments. I never even mentioned the socioeconomic adjustment that can come from if you're first gen or if you're coming from an under-resourced family. I'll never forget this story, Vince. One of the students I worked with some time ago, very, very, very talented. Very talented student body president. Susan and I worked together, tons of leadership, and won this incredible scholarship to a highly selective school. I'm pausing because I'm realizing, no, I'm not going to say the school because you just never know who. I don't want somebody to out her. Oh, were you talking about so-and-so? I never forget when I got that email from a listener. And they're like,
Lord.
When you told that story, was that Mark Lekansky? Because I went to the prom with him, and that sounded like Mark Lekansky. I'm like, oh my goodness. Fortunately, it wasn't, but it let me know. It let me know just how discreet you have to be.
Yeah.
So this student, anybody would just think they just exude confidence because they were just really one of the most naturally talented leaders that you'd ever see. But they were quite under-resourced, just financially. And they went to a really, really, really wealthy school. And I had a chance to visit them at the school. And I remember the student saying to me, and of course she was a rock star at this, the school there, but she said, I think I'm pretty self-confident, but it's pretty hard when, you see how many Mercedes Benzes are in the parking lot and these 18-year-olds are driving Benzes to not sometimes doubt yourself. And, and it really kind of hit me that imposter syndrome can really be real, even for someone that you think has it all together and they're under-resourced, when all of a sudden you throw them into a pool of affluence and the question, the question is, for your summers or for your spring breaks, it's what country are you going to,
Yes.
And so that's a whole other layer.
Yeah.
So I just think, but the bottom line is you can take all the things I've mentioned and you've mentioned, and you can all put them under one category of adjustments or transitions. There's so many adjustments and transitions going on. Why not let people put their toe in the water rather than expect them to dive into the deep end right away?
Yes.
Like, to me, that's not coddling, especially if we're talking one semester out of 8. So I'm a huge fan of the ungrading. Most of this talk is freshman year. Most of this is talk around transitions. you know, and I love to see educational entrepreneurship and experimentation with new things. And I love all these think tanks going on, all these discussions. And I loved it when it said, hey, why not use the COVID to question everything? It reminds me of when I interviewed Chris Gruber from Davidson on the podcast. And he talked about how, like, we didn't know what was going to happen with the pandemic. Like, we can't visit schools. People can't visit us. People can't take SATs. And we're flying from the seat of the pants. We don't have any of our yield models are completely thrown out the window because all the traditional metrics we use to project yield are gone. And it all worked out. And guess what? Application numbers went up and people attended things virtually. And you know what it did to us? It made us think, what else are we just doing because we've been doing it that we need to challenge? And why don't we use this time to challenge our conventional ways of doing things? You know, for them, it meant a lot of things. He's like, why are we, you can go back and listen to that interview if you haven't heard it, but why are we asking, I was talking to the listeners. But sorry. I know you're on your game, man. You bring your A game every day.
I listened to that interview 2 times. It was
wow. Yeah, it was really good. It was really good. You beat me on that one. But he was like, like January, like, why are we asking people to turn stuff in January 1st? Are we really going to read? We're not reading your application for regular decision then. So why not give them, an extra week to the 8th? And it just a lot of things. And so it just kind of reminds me of that. And hey, that's one good thing that came of the pandemic, is to cause people to re-examine things and not, because we all have to be careful with that. We just fall in the habits of doing what we've always done in a perfunctory way. And we don't sometimes, self-examine and reflect.
Right. Well, I'm glad you put out that challenge. I'd like to challenge some schools specifically by name to go back and put their virtual
names, Vince. Names.
Their virtual information sessions. I'm sorry, Boulder, SMU. Why for 3 months? We're in the summer. Get on it.
Well, one thing I like to challenge schools on: why can't you have on-demand content?
Yes.
Why do you make me have to come and be there at 10 a.m.? And I know for you, you're very sensitive to time zones. Yes. You're like, do you know what time that is in Hawaii?
Right.
So why can't you have on-demand content? I mean, it's great that you've gotten all your virtual. I love it. But your next step is, in some schools like Babson have done a great job. They have amazing on-demand content.
Yes.
Content. And others are, really need to up their game.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't want to do it, live, then if you do on demand, there's a lot of schools, if you go through the Common App, little tip here, and you click on that virtual tour link, that, university or VUU or whatever it is, the card will come up so you can capture the information from the student and that they watched your virtual tour. But to not have that resource.
Oh, you're talking about UVisit?
Yeah, UVisit.
UVisit, yeah.
When you click on that link in the Common App and that card comes up, that's demonstrated interest, people. So, but, I have been surprised, and you've heard me say it on other podcasts, that virtual content is disappearing. I feel like dinosaur time, like we're like barely out of the pandemic, but boy, people are running from virtual information. And I have students who literally would love to access that because they're trying to decide. And if there's nothing there, you lose their interest immediately.
So Vince, you're finding that some schools are not having the same virtual presence? Really? Because everybody I talked to was like, hey, that's one thing that we're shocked how many people attended that. It blew us out of the water. And we're absolutely sticking with that, for our ongoing marketing efforts.
I could give you the names right now.
Wow.
And in fact, I did, but there's some more I could include. And the other thing is, if you're going to offer it, like I love, I'm going to shout out to Wisconsin-Madison. They have a virtual information session at 7 p.m. their time. That means somebody in LA can actually be there to watch it. If your virtual session is only at 4 and you're in the East Coast, that student can't be there at 1 o'clock because they're in school. So anyway, I love when the school is thoughtfully trying to give access to as many people that they're trying to reach out to and increase the numbers as possible.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great article, Vince. I'm already looking forward to next month because you've sent us the August one, and I'm excited. So see you next month, my friend.
Thank you so much. Take care.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
So Lisa, this next question that was sent in from Alex, who's got a parent of a 7th grader, is kind of a different version of a question we've had before, but a really important one. So I'll let the listeners hear it, and then let's dive in.
Hi, Mark and team. My name is Alex, and I'm the parent of a rising 7th grader. I have a question about math. After hearing your last podcasts about calculus, I started paying attention to the track my daughter is on. She's in grade level math, and so if we do nothing, she will top out in 12th grade at pre-calculus. Here's my question. I've gotten conflicting advice on how important it is to try to advance her in math if she's not going to be majoring in math or STEM more generally. This is a kid who loves English and social sciences and does extremely well in those classes, but is getting a B to B plus in grade level math. How important is it if she wants to have the option of going to a selective college someday to affirmatively try to advance her, or should we spend time developing things that she's strong at? Thank you so much.
So I want to let you share your thoughts on this one first, and then I'll share mine. Are you comfortable with that, or do you want me to start? I can do either way.
No.
Okay.
Well, any question about math, I love those questions.
You could relate.
All I'm going to say, Alex, is that I advanced to, this is a long time ago, but I advanced to, I could have taken calculus my senior year of high school, but I knew this teacher was really bad, and she gave my brother a D, and he's really good at math. And that kind of, screwed him over for a lot of his college applications. So I decided not to take calculus, and I took typing instead. And I can type 75 words a minute.
Whoa.
And that actually, that doesn't matter so much anymore. But I pretty much supported myself in graduate school by temping as a legal secretary because I could type so quickly. So, but that being said, this is such a difficult problem because the average American school system, they don't have just a grade level math track that ends in calculus. But, there are a lot of highly selective colleges where they've done studies with the admissions officers, and they put a lot of weight on calculus, even for students at liberal arts colleges who might not be going into a math or science-based career. So, and it puts parents and students in a really difficult situation, because if you're not incredibly gifted in math, then you got to jump the track and fight the system somehow. And I know in public school that can be a very difficult system to fight. And it's also stress on the students, because if they, math is a lot about abstract reasoning and concept formation. And that develops on a neurological schedule, right? It's your brain development that determines when you can do certain things. It's not what you're taught. And so if kids have different neurological tracks with that, putting them in advanced math could be super traumatizing, whereas if they took it in college, it might be fine. So I feel like it's kind of a problem that I can certainly understand why Alex is concerned.
Yeah, and to me, there's a clear telltale in her question that informs my thinking, and that is you're getting a B to a B plus in regular.
Right.
Now, I never heard her say she's slacking off, she doesn't try, she doesn't turn assignments in. If anything, I think it was implied that math's just not her jam.
Right.
She loves English, she loves social science, she mentioned, and she excels there. So what I would say is that if somebody's getting a B or B plus in regular math, then they don't need to throw themselves, into the fire and try taking more advanced stuff, because what's going to happen is, one, they're not likely to get better than a B or B plus. They're probably going to get worse. Their other grades might suffer because of either all the time they're putting on math, or mental health, or stress. School's not going to be as fun. And so to me, it's really clear, in general, I don't advise, if you're not, if you're getting a B or B plus in regular, then you don't, that's just the path for you. And that's fine. So the question then becomes sort of what her question was are selective colleges still possible? And just to give a complete honest answer, that depends on your definition of selectivity. So some people define selective schools as any school that denies more students than they admit. Certainly there's schools that, and that's not very many schools, by the way. Certainly there are schools that a student, they, let's say, gets to pre-calc. Let's say she gets to pre-calc with, let's just say B, a B in pre-calc. There's certainly lots of schools like that. Now, if you're looking at schools that admit under 20%, last I saw is 3% of schools in the country, by the way, that take less than 1 in 5. Maybe not, possibly, but maybe not. If you're talking about schools that single-digit admit rates, probably not. Those are schools that generally like to see student has got to advanced level in something like math. But I would say it doesn't matter. Like, it's like you'll do well in life. You can still go to very reputable schools. You want to play to your strengths when it comes to course selection. You want to play to your strengths. She's doing well in history, social sciences. She enjoys it. Play to your strengths. I would say just in general that there will be selective schools that would be available to her if she does well with all the other things. It's probably not the most selective, and who cares? It's not going to have a bearing on her happiness in life or her career aspirations. But the term selectivity is just so nuanced with how you're defining it. Some people it's deny more than you admit, and some it's like the hardest of the hardest to get in.
Right.
And also keep in mind that even for some more selective schools, there are a lot of schools that are going to look at your curriculum in light of your intended major. And so that's why she still could potentially get in some very selective schools, because when they see that she's not interested in a math correlated major, then you can get a lot of slack on that. So in general, I would say that she still is going to be eligible for selective schools because she's not likely to pick a math-based major, and assuming she does well not only in grades but in all the other aspects of evaluation. We know what they are. We've talked about them on here before. It's everything from your personal qualities to your writing to your extracurriculars to your recommendations to schools that are looking at demonstrated interest and institutional priorities, and all of these other factors, fit to major, all these other things we talk about all the time. As long as you do well in all of those areas, and you should do really, really well. And so I definitely would not be forcing her to have to somehow get into advanced math because you're of the impression that, she's going to have very limited college options. I would say the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's a movement, that to try to work, there are some people in admissions who feel that admissions officers are placing way too much emphasis on calculus, especially for people who are not going into very rigorous math or science majors, and that's actually discriminatory, right? Because, a lot of schools don't offer calculus, or they offer poor quality calculus. Like, take my school back in the day, for example, that was not good quality calculus. And so those kids actually, are at a disadvantage in this process. So there is some movement to try to make admissions officers more aware of that bias and what the implications of that bias are. And this is a rising seventh grader, so who knows what's going to happen in 4 or 5 years. Maybe, there'll be some movement on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not necessarily something I think that the public follows as closely. It's in college counseling circles. There's a lot of talk about this, partly for the reasons that Lisa mentioned. Like, a lot of schools don't offer calculus and poor quality calculus. But another big factor is a lot of people are finding that statistics just correlates better to the skill set that you actually need to excel. And it's just been this long-standing thing that you have to have calculus, but is it really a correlate to the skill set that you need? And increasingly people are finding that it's not. So why are we having almost this noose around people's neck if there's no correlation between the skill set that you need in the job market? Now, this is for certain jobs, right? Obviously, if we're talking about things like calculus, calculus. I got calc on the brain, Lisa. If we're talking about things like engineering, comp sci, finance and some heavily math-oriented business programs, those are going to be very, very, very calculus-centered. But talking about the lion's share of other jobs that don't need it. And so increasingly there is more blowback on that. And it's the debate is pretty furious. And the non-calculus side has the momentum right now.
Yeah.
And so your point is well taken. Like, this is a 7th grader, like, where are things going to be in 6 years?
Yeah, I was talking to my husband, Alan, and he's an actuary. And he has his master's degree in economics, and he's really great at math. And so I asked him, like, do you use calculus in any of this? He's like, no, I just do a lot of really complicated arithmetic and probability. Like, he doesn't, and that's his living is numbers. I mean, there are so many careers, even with math, where you don't use it. So he said, like, he'd rather see someone take statistics if they wanted to be an actuary, because that's what they're going to be using.
Yeah, statistics is very practical math. I mean, it's really, really so many different, careers. And a lot of people that struggle with calculus don't necessarily struggle with statistics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I struggled with both, but
well, you couldn't have struggled that much. You wouldn't have kept getting in all your schools you got in.
Oh my God.
I think you're a little humble over here, Lisa.
No, I mean, it was hard. It did not come easy to me. But I'll tell you, like, I'm not really that great at statistics, but I know how to read, like some scientific articles, and some of them I can look at and be like, oh, well, that's a ridiculous finding because, there's this confounding variable, or they use this analysis. I mean, I think that's a very valuable skill for adults to be able to have, to be able to critically evaluate, kind of scientific evidence based on the statistics of the situation. Also research methodology. I'd rather see kids take that, who aren't making spaceships.
So hopefully that was helpful, Alex. Thanks.
And Alex is our second recipient of our book giveaway to any listener who sends in a Speakpipe question and we read it on the air. She will receive a copy of Elliot Felix's excellent book, How to Get the Most Out of College, subtitled 127 Ways to Make Connections, Make It Work for You, and Make a Difference. And Lisa recently interviewed Elliot Felix on our podcast. Alex, I'll follow up with you to get your mailing address. Congratulations.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, for part 3 of a 4-part interview with Akil Bello. In this part, Akil shares what score gain a student can typically expect if they're trying to assess the ROI if they invest in one-on-one test prep. Akil shares his theory of when a student should start their test prep, when in high school. Akil shares why there are such persistent test score differences between Black students and white students and Asian students and Hispanic students, between men and women, between international students and U.S. students. Akil critiques the advice I give to students who want to do their own self-prep for lack of resources. Akil talks about how these standardized tests often test performance under pressure. And then Akil answers the question, is the SAT culturally biased? Listen and enjoy. So I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure you've been asked many times over. I'm curious how you answer this. Somebody comes to you. I'll throw out 2 scenarios. Their practice tests, one student's getting an 1100 or 21 ACT. And the other student is coming to you with let's say a 1400 32 ACT. They're coming to you with those 2 scenarios. And then, hey, Akil, I'd like to do some test prep with you, maybe 24 hours one-on-one. What can I expect my score gain to be? How do you answer that?
You said one is coming with an 1100 and one is coming with a 1400?
Yeah.
Well,
I know which one's going to go up the most. That goes without being said.
Right.
But the point is, like, people are often curious, and with test prep, like, what is going to be my ROI if I make this investment?
Right.
And I know there's lots of factors that can determine that. Some of it is you, and some of it is the student. But how do you answer that?
Yeah, I tend to, in case you haven't figured it out yet, avoid, direct answers that aren't true and that lack the nuance behind them. So if somebody starting with me, let's say at an 1100 came and say, what should I expect? I would tell them I would be disappointed if we don't get 150. But I would also frame it huge, like, here's the work that it's going to
150
require.
meaning 150 point
At least
increase.
150 points, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's a reasonable expectation,
Sure.
right? Probably conservative.
Yeah. For
Right? And I always
1100.
go conservative, right?
Yeah.
Right? So I always go
Yeah.
conservative, right? But I would also make sure they understand that the amount of work that involves, right? That they're going to be doing practice. They're going to be doing 2, 3, maybe 4 hours of practice every week, right? And that's going to last for 2-3 months.
Do you have a theory on like how long someone should do? Do you think 2 to 3 months? How many hours? Generally, there's all that custom compared to where the person's at and what, how many scores they're missing.
So not really.
Mm-hmm.
So let me answer that the normal way I would answer it. It generally takes me around 20 hours to teach all the material on the test.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I have a curriculum that I've written over the course of years. And
this is true for both SAT and ACT?
Yeah. It'll take, 20-ish hours, let's say 18 to 20 hours to teach the material on the test, right? To somebody who's never done any test prep. Teach all the material, do some strategy work, review some homework questions. The more questions they have, the more that time will go up. So your 24 hours that you mentioned earlier, it's a great number to throw out there as here's your expectation. And for families trying to figure out a budget, if you go 24 hours is my expected amount of time, the person tells me $100 an hour, here's my budget. Great. Now you have a number to work with. I don't think that I would, I'm not going to set that in stone, but at least it gives you a number to operate around, right? Because it generally takes somewhere around that to just teach, to go through all the different concepts that are on the test. Now, somebody started at 1400, I'm not going through a full curriculum with them. They just don't need it,
Sure.
right? So it varies a lot depending on where the student is and what they need, right? So I think that changes things because at a 1400, they're literally getting probably like 15 of 215 questions wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, and right. My bet is of the 15 they got wrong, let's say they got 7 wrong because they added 1 + 1 and got 11.
Sure.
Right. So it's like,
careless.
So it's like, there's 7 careless mistakes, maybe 3 concepts they don't know, and a partridge in a pear tree. Right. Like, so there's not a ton of content instruction to do. There is strategy and time management and different things around how do you become a better test performer, not how do you learn the things you need to learn. And that's one of the problems that sort of policy-wise I have with these tests. I would offer there is no meaningful distinction between what a 1400 scorer knows and what a 1600 scorer knows. That's like arguing the difference between LeBron and Michael Jordan in terms of how good they are at basketball. It is a dumb argument. And it's lovely in basketball. Have that argument in basketball every day. I don't want colleges having that argument. It's a dumb argument to have. Because if I blink twice on the SAT, I'll get a 1400.
Do you have theories on a good time to start testing? Like I've typically said, as long as you've had Algebra 2, end of 10th grade, you take advantage of your rising 11th is a good time to start. Of course, it depends on what your summer plans are, but assuming you have more time available in the summer versus the school year, what are your thoughts on that?
I like summer after 10th grade for making a testing plan. Mm-hmm. Whether that means starting to prepare or not, I don't know. Right. But I think parents should get ahead of all these things. And with rising 11th graders, you make your plan. We're going to take the PSAT in October. Are we going to do prep for that or are we not? Please, please, please don't do prep for that.
I know. I'm really with you on that.
Right? Like, okay, fine. Do prep for that only if your kid has already scored in the 90th percentile. And there's
a shot at the national merit and you want to maybe ride that national merit money into place.
Right. And you know where that money is because most College Board oversells that as well.
I know. The places that give the money are not the places people want to go most of the time.
Yes.
Especially for kids from a certain social class.
Correct. Correct. So you have to be really clear about is it worth the investment for that test, right? Now it could just be we want to do it all in the fall, roll October straight into a November SAT and be done with our testing in the fall. I can't argue with that. I kind of like lightening the kids' load throughout 11th and 12th grade. Right. So part of it is, for me, it's in the summer, we need a testing plan that accommodates and understands the PSAT is coming up for most of us, for many kids. Then plan for 2 SATs or ACTs relatively close together, right? So,
all right, I'm gonna go back to another tough question. I'm actually throwing even another wrinkle into it. So I know you've seen the research, and anytime you see this test scores by race and gender, you see Asians way up here, then Caucasians. Usually you'll see Hispanic, Latinx, and then Black. You'll see guys ahead of ladies all the time, especially in math.
mhm.
A different wrinkle. I'm sure you've seen this. Nigerians and Ghanaians test like Asians. It seems like you see these stratospheric test scores coming from there. What are your theories on all of that? Everybody's got a different theory. Why are there these great disparities, sometimes with race and gender and country and all these different things on the test?
Because we live in America. I mean, like, that's not hard to align all those things. First, let's start with international populations, right? Generally, those who were allowed to immigrate here,
Mm-hmm.
right, were highly educated, right? If I'm not mistaken, and I could be jumbling the numbers, but something like 15% of Chinese population in China have advanced degrees. Something like 85% of Chinese-born people here have degrees. So you have a highly educated population with a history of going to school and learning and performing on tests who are encouraging their kids to do what they did. Of course, the outcomes are going to align with that, right? Also skewing wealthier, so having access to things, having fewer, not none, but fewer racial biases to deal with in terms of where you can live and where you can't. So then able to access quote unquote better schools, right? So more money, better schools, more education, like all of these things also define the demographic performance of these tests. And so now you're compounding them in Asian families largely. Now, one of the problems with Asian is it doesn't disaggregate at all.
And that's really important.
Right?
I was going to say, like, I've seen the average test scores for Cambodians very similar to black students. So there's a
So
social
lot of
class
that,
piece there.
yes,
Yeah.
right. So a lot of it is social economics, demographics, education, which all overlap but aren't the same. And so a lot of things are hidden in when you simply look at it from a racial point of view, right?
So what's your answer on gender? Because that's not really going to have a socioeconomic component to it.
Maybe not, but we're still in America, and how many hundreds of years were women told they shouldn't, can't, aren't good at math?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we've had 30 years of less of that.
So on gender, you see it as mostly social conditioning.
I can see that as a huge contributing factor. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a researcher who did the analysis, blah, 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 right? But
Sure.
I've seen research to support that, and it seems to make sense, right? It aligns with what we know. Also, when you think about what a standardized test like the SAT and ACT are, right? It rewards aggressiveness and it rewards guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And generally the research has shown that men are more likely to guess aggressively rather than to think carefully, slowly, and methodically. Right? So these tests actually punish methodical thinking and reward aggressive thinking.
I think it's a great answer.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
This is Linda with this week's recommended resource, the NCAA Guide for the College-Bound Student Athlete. If your family is navigating the world of college athletics recruiting, this guide is required reading. At nearly 40 pages, this free guide unpacks what families need to understand about the process. It provides crucial context on the reality of athletic scholarships. Only 2% of high school athletes receive them, and under 2% of those athletes actually go pro. The guide covers the national letters of intent, differences across NCAA divisions, academic eligibility standards, and sample timelines. And spoiler alert, they start earlier than you think. The guide covers pathways for international and homeschooled students, along with a glossary of key recruiting terms for those new to the world of college athletics. If your student is interested in playing college sports, the NCAA Guide for the College-Bound Student Athlete really is essential. Arm yourself with knowledge. The guide can be found at ncaa.org/playcollegesports.
So I want you to critique some advice I give to people. These are people with limited resources.
Yeah, I wouldn't tell them that.
No, I'm saying they have limited resources, that I know. And they're like, look, I'm not paying for 30 hours of one-on-one prep. But I will tell them, take a bunch of practice tests, go back and go back and grade them, and put all of your missed answers into 3 categories. The careless group that you talked about earlier, I knew that. The group of, now that I see the answer, I'm able to figure out what it was. And then that group that you're flummoxed by. And then I say, go to your Akil or your Test Prep Pro with all these questions. Like, you do multiple practice tests and you're starting to see patterns. Bring the questions that you're just not able to figure out, even when you see the correct answer, and have them micro-target and focus with you there. And, it's not going to take as many hours of prep, but you should see some score gains. But tell me what your thought. Once again, I'm dealing with somebody with limited. This is not maybe most people, but what are your thoughts on that for advice?
It's not the worst advice I've ever heard. Let me say that more positively. That's pretty decent advice.
Okay.
I guess I would frame it slightly differently.
Uh-huh.
Self-study's hard, right? But so I think part of the issue would be how much is their budget, and I think that's the thing that's being left out, right? Like,
sure.
If you have $1,000 to spend on test prep, I can give you some really good options that's better than what you just laid out, right? If you have $40, then what you laid out is the tutoring part of it is non-existent, right? You're going to find nobody at $40, right? So,
right.
So it all depends on kind of what that budget actually is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Fair.
But as a general guideline, not knowing budget at all, it's not a terrible way to do it. I think I would add on a couple of things. You can access instructional resources. You've kind of left out the instructional piece, right? You can add on instructional resources, whether it's going through all of Khan Academy that I don't love, but does fall into the category of probably a little bit better than nothing.
Sure.
Right. So I think that you can, to me, there's really 3 things that goes on with test prep. There's knowledge, there's recognition, and there's execution. You have to build up your knowledge base to ensure you know all the things that are going to be tested. That you have all the formulas, you know the terms, you understand how they look at things, what they expect you to see, so how the test is structured, and what the information is that they're making the assumption you've already acquired. I have to make sure I have all that information, because if I don't, then those questions would be the ones that you're saying are the ones that flummox them because they just don't know how to do it. So build your knowledge base, right? The second step is recognition, learning to understand the test and the games that it plays, right? And the more you learn to recognize how they test information, because the way I think about these tests is that they're testing things, kids, that College Board believes you should have learned, probably in ways that you haven't learned them, right? So even if I did learn them, but you tested in a weird way, it's hard for me to get that right. So you have to build in the recognition piece of, okay, seeing the patterns. This is what they're asking for here. This is what that looks like there. My math teacher would never say it like this, but this is what they're doing here, right? Like, you have to get that understanding. And then there's the execution, which is all about performance under pressure, right? And learning to manage your performance under pressure so that you are as effective as possible, right?
I like that answer.
So that's what they're trying to build, right? And so I don't dislike sort of the advice you give, but it sort of skips through 2 of those and goes after 1.
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. So every now and then I encounter a kid who says, I'm better at self-prep than any other type of prep. I know where I'm missing my questions. And I've kind of seen it bear out. Like, this is actually normally somebody who's tried one-on-one with somebody. And this is a highly, highly driven, highly motivated kid who's at least in the 1400s, at least. But then they're like, I can go, I can do self-prep, I know exactly what I need, and they come back and they crush it. Does that surprise you? Like, this is something that I see a couple times a year.
Listen, 14, like the minute you start talking about those those scores in the stratosphere, right? Those astronomically high scores, like they're not getting things wrong because they don't understand it. They're getting things wrong because they fell into the trap, right? Let me ask you the standardized test question. We'll see if you're college ready. All right, you have 5 seconds to answer the next question I ask you. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Sure.
here we go. How many fingers do I have?
2.
You lose. You are
Okay.
clearly not college ready. Everyone in the audience, I'm holding up 2 fingers. You've answered the wrong question. Because what did I ask you?
How many fingers am I holding up?
That's not what I asked. You can go
What
back
did
to the
you just-
recording and listen. How many fingers do I have?
Smarty pants.
That to me is
Smarty
the SAT
pants got
in
me.
a nutshell. Right? Like
Nothing like
now,
an example to drive home a point.
So, now, if I tried that again, you're not going to fall for it.
Right.
Right? So, I mean, because you have the information. Like, I'm positive you know how many fingers a person has, right?
Sure,
Right?
sure.
So it's
Right.
like, so part of the issue with all of this is performance under pressure. The more you practice, the more you're ready for, Akil's going to mess with me and ask some sort of question that has an angle to it, right? Like that, then you become more prepared for it and you're looking for those angles, right? And so it's not surprising that somebody out of 1400 who already knows all the material only needs some practice to refine their skills to become better at testing. Now, that's often easier to do with help than on your own. So it takes, so again, now we're talking about a student what their preferences are, right? Somebody who is more likely to stay on track and do the practice and analyze the results on their own, or somebody who wants somebody to bring in an adult to guide them through that.
Wow. What do you think, Akil? Every once in a while, I'll hear somebody kind of going back to the question we asked about, particularly I'll hear it usually in the context of Black students. The reason they don't do well on the test is because the tests are culturally biased. Do you feel like that's just, bunch of twaddle, or do you feel like there's an element of truth to that?
There's elements of truth to most things. The question is how big that element is. I definitely think there are elements of truth to it there, and I think it's really hard to judge.
Can you give an example?
Not a good one. So
Okay.
It's fascinating because Jay Rosner has done some research on white preference questions. And I went to one of his early presentations and I'm sitting in the audience. I'm waiting for him to show me this math problem with word problems in it that that uses, I don't know, Ruby to mean the gem, whereas in African-American community, Ruby is a name. So I'm waiting to see, contextual thing. And he put up a problem with only numbers in it. I'm like, wait a minute.
Was this back when you were at Princeton Review?
Yeah, maybe. So this is a while ago, but
I think of him as Mr. Princeton Review.
Well, he was Princeton Review Foundation. He still is, right? Which is very different from Princeton Review, the company.
Sure.
But what fascinated me was that there's different performances based on race on a question with only numbers in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really expecting that. I don't really know how to process that. What is it? Does it mean something about what's getting taught in one place versus another? I don't know. And the differences were fairly stark, right? So all of the fairly simplistic impressions that I had around how to identify biases and things like that were kind of shot down by the examples he gave, right? So the differences existed, right? I don't know how to define them, and I've never seen any research that defines them well. So I challenge it this way. I also put it this way. How about we rewrite the SAT where we use only authors who are Black women? Think, everyone in the audience right now, about how you feel about that test. Because that's the test that Black people have been taking for 100 years in reverse. Right? I don't know that it would be biased, but I do know that it makes y'all uncomfortable. Right? So there's that whole, right? wait a minute, nobody? Not I don't get none of them? Right? Not a single passage written by a white man? And right? It's uncomfortable. Right? So I think that there are things to the cultural bias piece of it that are complicated and deep, and College Board does claim to have done what they can to eliminate many of the biases, or all of the biases that they can, right? But I'll point out one final thing. The first sensitivity review, I believe it was was done in, I want to say, 1986. I graduated high school in 1989. So it's like, this is fairly recently they've even tried to examine these distinctions.
But I this is just my opinion. I don't think it's as big a factor as some people think. Because let me look at one thing. How does that explain math? Math.
But that's my point, right? It's like it's there, right? It may be there even if we don't see it. I don't know how it explains it, and I intentionally am not putting a number to it.
I think the answer you gave before about education and resources and culture of testing, I think that is overwhelmingly, the factors that are explaining differences.
And I'm going to challenge you to stop trying to minimize it. Let me say it this way, right? Never said there weren't other factors. Anytime I think that people try to get a yes or no out of things like that so they can feel better about saying, no, it's not culturally biased. Yes, it is. How about we say it's probably a contributing factor and just leave it there? Because we've got nothing else.
Yeah, I think that can be fair. I think sometimes when you hear the cultural bias argument, it's in the context of that's the predominant reason that explains the score differences.
Right.
That's just hard for me to believe that. But I'm definitely not saying it's a non-factor. And in fact, I wish I could remember them. I have seen some examples that when you saw them, you were like, ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Well,
no, I've seen some others like, and I would say that those don't exist anymore. I would probably bet that, right? Like the most recent thing that I've seen of claiming of sort of bias was in the New York Times. There was an article about gender bias through one of the reading passages. Sheila Akbar was part of that article. I always associate the article with Sheila, and I don't remember why. Maybe she brought it to the attention of College Board or something like that. But that's the only fairly modern example that I can think of a question that had fairly clear eyebrow-raisingness effect to it on first glance, right? But I think that one of the things that is important about this work of psychometrics and testing is that there's a lot of things that aren't visible that happen all the time, right? That aren't easily visible to those of us who aren't looking at the data from what's reproduced from the question. I've written questions, right? I've written questions that I thought were really hard. And then when I get the data back and show they're like 90% of kids got it right, or 90% of people got it right, and it turns out it's really easy. And I realize that my distribution of answer choices are off. And it makes it too easy to guess. Right? And I wouldn't have caught that until I saw the actual numbers.
Friends, this concludes the third part of my 4-part interview with Akil Bello. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. It's a shorter one.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
All right, Lisa, I'm very excited to learn about East Carolina University. I've never been there. I don't really get that many students that ask me about it. So it really is under the radar for me and probably a lot of our listeners. So tell us what we need to know. I know you just recently visited.
Yes. I had not heard of East Carolina University either until I moved to North Carolina. And even then, like if I had not kind of made an effort to know about it, I don't think I would. And I'm really glad I did, because I think East Carolina University has so much to offer. And, I think it's like, as one of the staff members put it, it's the biggest research university you've never heard of. And it definitely has an image problem here in North Carolina. It's considered a party school. It's considered the school that anyone can get into. And I think even Greenville, where it's located, is considered somehow like bad, but none of those things are actually true anymore. Their admissions criteria keep rising every year. There's a really serious emphasis on academics now. And Greenville keeps getting rated highly as a great college town. So East Carolina University started in 1901 when the people in Eastern Carolina wanted to have a college. And so they asked the North Carolina Assembly to charter it, which they did. And but not until 1907 because politics, right? So anyway, it's grown a lot since 1907. And right now it is a public university. It has 22,000 undergraduates and 6,000 graduates. And Greenville, North Carolina is where it's located. Greenville is about, I'm going to say an hour and 10 minutes east of Raleigh. And Greenville, I actually really quite enjoy the town. I kind of happened upon it by accident last year when I got lost. And it was one of those things like, where am I? Because it has a lot of great culture, restaurants, live music scene, art scene, and they have a lot of natural features like a river that is great for kayaking and canoeing. And it's really like a blue dot in like kind of somewhat of a red sea, but it's a liberal enclave. I think the schools are pretty good. So, but when you talk to people in Chapel Hill about Greenville, they kind of put their nose up at it a little bit, I guess.
I have a question. I'm just listening, think of the numbers. That's pretty big. I knew it was big. I didn't know it was that big, like 22,000 undergrad, 6,000. I think that must make it the fifth biggest school in the state, because I'm thinking when you take the UNC schools, right, like Charlotte and Chapel Hill and Greensboro and then NC State, I can't think of another school in the state bigger than East Carolina.
No, I think you might be right. I mean, numbers of me, we don't get along. But
I think you're just modest when you say that.
well, I'm just saying, it seems like it really is a big school, and you wouldn't necessarily know that.
I do hear about their basketball every now and then, but that's about it.
Yeah, but I don't hear about their basketball like at all.
Sure.
Here in Chapel Hill, we're kind of it's dwarfed by other teams, but. Anyway, but it's about an hour to an hour and a half from the beach as well, Greenville is. So the campus is big, and there's it's kind of a mix of sort of your typical red brick Southern style campus.
Of course, they're all red brick.
They're all red brick. That's because the clay is red here, though. Have you seen the clay? It's so red. But they also have a lot of new buildings that sometimes I find when there are new buildings and the red brick, it clashes. I didn't feel that way. But the new buildings are very, very modern on the inside, and they have a lot of new buildings. And it's a campus where you can walk to town, but a lot of people also have a car. And they actually have several campuses, including the main campus, which I visited, the Health Sciences campus, which is by the hospital that's in Greenville, East Carolina Health System. And then they have a campus on the Outer Banks in North Carolina, which is focused on marine biology. And they also have an Italy campus, and they're very proud of this campus because they own the building. It's their classes, it's their professors. And so they really feel it's kind of like a part of their
So how does that work? Like, could a student, is it like SLU in Madrid? Like, can you go over there for a year or?
I think you could maybe go for a year. I think it depends on your major. One of the things that I find really impressive about SLU in Madrid is that they make it so integrative and seamless with so many of their majors. I'm not sure that East Carolina is up to that level of integration yet, but it's definitely, I think, something that they're working towards.
Well, you caught my attention with the Outer Banks campus because that's one that, like, when you live in Pennsylvania, and that's a really popular place to vacation. And so we used to vacation in the Outer Banks, and I really love me some Outer Banks. And a lot of schools, when they're right on the water like that, they tend to have really strong marine biology.
Right, exactly. So, and it's a big university, and they have several different schools or colleges within it. They have an arts and science college. They have the College of Allied Health Sciences, and that's probably one of the biggest colleges there. They produce more healthcare specialists than anybody else in North Carolina. So if you're going to a PT/OT speech, chances are they went to East Carolina.
By the way, for you newer listeners, that's physical therapy, occupational therapy, PT/OT. You went some admissions vernacular there, Lisa.
Oh, no, it's just because kids and I are always breaking ourselves. So we're always in one or the other. Somebody's always in something. They also have the largest college of business in North Carolina. And they have a very well respected school of entrepreneurship. And they also have a hospitality program for, the hotel industry as well. In addition, they have a really well-respected education college, and a lot of teachers in North Carolina have gone to ECU. And so it's the top producer of educators for North Carolina. And then over 40% of ECU students are STEM majors, and many of them are in the College of Engineering and Technology. And that has an engineering program. It also has a technology piece. They have a lot of hands-on majors for that. And then they also have a College of Fine Arts and Communication. And then, of course, the College of Health and Human Performance.
Can I ask you about engineering?
Mm-hmm.
Is it? Because you know how engineering is in the state, right? You know that Chapel Hill basically just has biomedical, really doesn't have it. Right. So everybody goes to NC State for engineering, and that's like the hot place. And then I also know some people will look at Virginia Tech if they look out of state. But what I've been hearing is that UNC Charlotte is really the up-and-comer that's, if you can't, obviously state's getting a lot harder to get into. So people are really finding UNC Charlotte attractive for engineering. So
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think ECU is thought of as popularly as UNC Charlotte in general.
Right. Well, that could be Charlotte versus Greenville. Location's really important. I mean, it really appeals to people. I was telling somebody who I'm working with recently about how much I really like Redlands a lot. I'd like them to look at Redlands, and this is a California, lifetime California. I've been there for a long time. They're like, but it's in San Bernardino. Like, I just can't imagine how good it could be if it's in San Bernardino. And so it just really shows kind of how people think about location, and location can stigmatize a school.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of bias, of course, and illogic when people think about all this stuff, which I definitely think East Carolina University is a victim of that bias.
And it's also a lot of probably a class bias too. Like when you say Chapel Hill, I mean, I'm sure the real estate is higher in Chapel Hill than Greenville.
Probably. I can't imagine.
Yeah. So I think you're already talking about a more educated population that might look at it differently than a first-gen student might.
Right. Just a couple other colleges that they have that are of note. They have a great nursing college, and they have one of the highest NCLEX pass rates in the country, and they produce a ton of nurses. And also they have a really amazing honors college that is very involved. And they have a lot of special classes, research, professional development options within that honors college. So let's just talk a little bit about health sciences, since that is their bread and butter. So they are really strong in biology and pre-med, nursing, all of the allied health majors like physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech. And one of the things that they have that really helps kids with their med school applications is they have undergraduate research classes. So they have a formalized way where undergraduates can learn research methods, and then that sets you up with a professor with whom you can work, and you'll create a final project through that program.
Oh, that's great.
They also have a lot of advising for pre-med that they pride themselves on. And they have a lot of research there. It's an R2 university, and I went on a counselor tour, so we kind of...
Tell our listeners what R2 is. I mean, some will know, some won't know.
Well, I'm not going to say that I know the exact numbers, but R1 is they're the biggest kind of research that there is. And then R2 is they're the next biggest kind of research university that there is.
It's true. And it has to do with research grants and fellowships and dollars from the federal government and everything that you get, and research projects professors are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but anyway, on the counselor tour, they took us on the new science center, which just opened up, and it's a building that's primarily devoted to research. And they took us all through all the different labs. I mean, they are doing a lot of research there, and they have a lot of ability to do research there because they have all the latest equipment and technology there. In addition, if you are pre-med, they have internships in the very large East Carolina University Health System. So you will be able to get actual clinical practice experience there. In terms of the other programs, business is really well known for their entrepreneurship and their marketing program. And one of the things that really impressed me about East Carolina University is how incredibly robust their support services are.
That's great.
So one of the problems that they had was a low graduation rate, and that they tried to figure out what is causing this. And what they have done is they have built in like a wraparound system for students. So once somebody gets in the door of their office, like if you can just get them into the door, then they feel like they will give them whatever support they need, whether it's tutoring, executive coaching, executive function coaching, helping match them up with any kind of financial help or mental health issues. And they have something called the Starfish flagging system. And so anyone at the school, so if, for instance, a professor notices a student isn't coming to class on a regular basis, they get flagged in the Starfish system. And there's different multimodal ways that they'll reach out to that student. Obviously, the support service office will call, they'll send student workers out to talk to that student. And they really just try to listen and see what the student needs. And then they try to provide that. So they're trying to prevent bad things from happening. And they really try to have a bunch of different ways that people can interact with their office. So some of it's virtual, some of it's in person, some of it's with staff, some of it's with peers, in the hope that someone will be able to engage with at least one of those. And doing this, they have really seen graduation rates rise every year. And I should say that parents can also flag a kid. So if they know their child's not doing well, a lot of times at schools, they don't want to hear from parents. They want you to go away and mind your own business, but please pay that bill. But here, they're not going to call you back and tell you what your student said, but they will definitely take your concern and go investigate it. So that is something I thought was really impressive. They also have a small program for people with like definite types of learning differences like dyslexia. And it's called the STEP program. And they take 10 students a year, and you actually apply in your junior year of high school. And if you apply into this program, they give you support. They help you apply to ECU and make sure that you're admitted. And then they give you a lot of support throughout the process. So you get like lots of different, learning help, all the different kinds of things that would be useful for a person, let's say, who had dyslexia. But it's very specific to like 2 or 3 learning differences. The other really impressive part of ECU that I liked was their honors college. And the honors college, again, is really comprehensive. It's so comprehensive that you can only get in either as a freshman or as a transfer. So you can't go to ECU for a year and then apply because there's so much, it's just so tracked that you couldn't make up for it. So all the honors college kids get scholarships on top of whatever merit aid that they have. And they have special housing, special classes, and their special projects. And that they get a lot of additional advising.
Friends, this completes the first half. Hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to do something very different than anything I've ever done before. I think you're going to like it. I'm going to get really, really personal about my own life. I'm going to share a past struggle and what I plan to do about it. And it might seem like it has nothing to do with college admissions or even college life. But I think if you listen really intently and really closely, you'll see it has a lot to do with college. Not so much admissions, although some college admissions as well, but mostly college life and life beyond college. And then after that, Lisa has a brand new interview. And it's one of the reasons why I say if you're a podcast listener and you're thinking of this primarily as admissions, you really need to think beyond that because we've completely changed. We're focusing as much on success in college these days at getting to college. And you're in for a treat as Lisa interviews Dr. Jenny Griffin on student resources that students really need to tap into if they want to be successful in college. And friends, you know, I promised you that I would close out with a quote for 10 weeks in a row from my book that I wrote called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, where I, on page 26, had 10 of my favorite college admissions quotes. Now, in order to understand the one I'm going to read today, it's about the rankings, college rankings. You need to understand something. One thing that's really common in cities is you have these rankings that occurs about the best restaurants to eat at. And a lot of times people think, oh, that's just completely, purely objective. But in reality, there's so much politics that goes on behind those rankings. Oftentimes what happens is, you know, the most expensive restaurants, the ones that are backed by the wealthiest in the city, through their connections, they end up getting very, very highly ranked in the restaurant industry compared to poor startups. So here's the quote. Economist Robert Wright, who was the country's labor secretary during Bill Clinton's administration, wrote a blistering attack on the U.S. News rankings in September of 2015. After the latest installment was published, he complained that the rankings were analogous to a restaurant guide that gives top rankings to the most expensive establishments that are backed and frequented by the wealthiest gourmets, and much lower rankings to the restaurants, check this out, with the best food at lower prices that attract a wide range of diners. He was making a point, and that is actually from Frank Bruni's book, author of Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be. Friends, I hope you tune in on Monday because we think we have a fantastic episode for you. See you on Monday, friends.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.